Welcome to WIOA and Pre-Employment Transition Services. And I want to thank you so much for coming. And I'm going to share my screen now, as I did actually push the record button. Thank goodness. So I wanted to share with you information about WIOA. I actually have a lot of background on this. And when I was working at the State Department of Health Services, I had the opportunity to participate in implementation of Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And so during that time, we worked with the Department of Public Instruction, Department of Workforce Development, and I was part of the Department of Health Services. And so I'm going to give you a lot of practical information about WIOA, and I also am an author of Pre-Employment Transition Services Solution, a curriculum that Attainment company created specifically for this. So as you can see, I was a special ed teacher. I've been a director of support employment agency for 25 years. I went back to school to be a registered nurse. One of the guys we were supporting in a job went on a ventilator and needed a lot of support. So I went back to be a nurse. And since then, I've been doing prep duty nursing as well and ran a personal care agency. Worked at Department of Health Services as their employment initiatives section chief. And I've been training and doing writing curriculum for Attainment company just these last couple of years. Love working there. And so I just wanted to share a lot of my knowledge and expertise, and it's based on real life experience. So here's getting into what is WIOA. So Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, it actually was passed in 2014. So it's a long time ago. And this curriculum was really meant to find ways to really engage schools, adult service provider system, the workforce, vocational rehabilitation, and really bring everybody together to say, hey, when we provide early intervention for youth, there's going to be some great outcomes from that. Through research, they knew this. And so they said, we've got to build this connection between schools and vocational rehabilitation, and then also the adult service system for those who are eligible for that. So there were sections of it that went into effect in 2016 for schools. So really what it's talking about is really empowering individuals with disabilities. And it's a large, WIOA is actually a very large legislation, federal legislation that does a lot more than just pre-employment transition services. I'll tell you just a little bit about it. But if you want to know what your state's plan is, every state was required to write a plan under WIOA. And you can actually find or search to see exactly what parts of it was for pre-employment transition services, which is targeted to youth in school. But you can find that there on the website. And you can get a copy of this PowerPoint by emailing me. So again, Janet at attainmentcompany.com, and I'm going to be able to give you a PowerPoint. I'll give you any resources that you may find helpful. So what we were looking at is there's four parts to WIOA. And one is specifically about employment and training. There's some other about one-stop shops like your job centers, talking about adult education and literacy programs. And then the one that really is targeted to pre-eds is the fourth one with vocational rehabilitation. So I want to kind of just briefly mention there's important resources for youth in transition now under Centers for Independent Living. And so the Centers for Independent Living had 4 core services, and now they have 5. And the one that obviously, if you have any access or interested in the Centers for Independent Living, it's really important whether you're an adult service provider, whether you're a school educator, connect to these organizations. They have a vast amount of resources. They do advocacy, information sharing, referrals, teaching independent living skills. They do a lot of self-advocacy, peer mentoring. So now they also are looking at transition and youth and how they can support youth. So some of the independent living centers might have been focused on youth in your communities. Many were more focused on people with physical disabilities and adults. So this is really expanding their experience of and also their responsibilities. So I gave you a couple links there. That's why I think it'd be great for you to get this PowerPoint, because I think this will be really helpful for you. But basically it's going into your independent living centers and looking at, there were some great on-demand trainings at that national website. on youth in transition, and then there were some great resources as well. So I gave you those links, and I think that that might be really helpful for you. Now that's one part of WIOA. Another part of WIOA was also looking at the job centers. So you may have had experience with the job centers already. You might have students going to the job centers, looking at potential jobs there, getting resume writing, interviewing skills. So you make use of them. Again, we're very welcoming to youth, some were not. But now they have a mandate under WIOA to be focused also on supporting youth. That might not be a large part of what they do, but it is absolutely a part of it. So you can locate where your job centers are at that website. It really is finding them within your community. And then they had a toolkit to actually look at careers. It's a great resource for you in looking at what are some jobs. So it's careeronestop.org. And then you can put in your zip code, your city, and you can find out what job openings there are, what career trends there are. And so that, again, good tools for young adults and with workers with disabilities. So it also talks about apprenticeship programs, farm worker jobs. A lot of often we think and focus on in one area when we think about our students with disabilities. And the idea here is to expand that focus. So the intent, the congressional intent under WIOA is they were changing all of the rules around the workforce development that they were doing. And so in this process, they decided we really want to enhance this interaction. Again, WIOA is a large legislation, but parts of it were focused on youth. And so they want to work earlier in high school, and they really wanted to look at both students that are eligible for vocational rehabilitation, that's I put VR, but also potentially eligible. So this was a real difficult challenge for vocational rehabilitation state agencies. Who do we look at that's potentially eligible? So one of the things that they've had to establish, and your state will have established, and each state had to do this on their own, is what are they going to look at as potentially eligible? And this is the great part of it. They were able to bring PreEts, or pre-employment transition services, into the schools or offer it along with the school day, and looking at students that might not already be in voc rehab, but were potentially eligible, and they can still provide those PreEt services for them. So this is a fantastic change. And then also, of course, you already, as school districts, if you're part of schools, or a lot of PreEts is provided by adult service agencies as well, in conjunction with schools. But you're already looking at what are your responsibilities for transition, already looking at what are your responsibilities about giving students the opportunity for employment. So, oh good, you're giving me some emails. Thank you so much. That's great, and plus feel free to email me as well, but I appreciate that. You'll definitely get that, those PowerPoints and links to it. So the Title IV, remember I said Title IV is really about students. You have to be a student with a disability. The age ranges from 14 up to 24, and then looking at what is it that you're going to be providing? What is pre-employment transition services? So one of the things that I'm going to talk about is exactly what would be considered PreEts. And I'm going to use that term just because it's faster and easier. So it's for any student with an IEP. So that's all disabilities. And it's for any student that has a 504 plan in school. So that might be students that are not necessarily getting a specific special education, you know, like pull-out classes, but they might be receiving some type of supports or services because maybe they have a physical disability. So there are definite restrictions, I'm going to explain to this, about entering into a sub-minimum wage jobs, which means also those sub-minimum wage facilities, which are another term, community rehab centers or sheltered workshops. There is now limits and rules about this. So, of course, schools already have looking at transition. That's a real primary part of IDEA. You have to have transition goals. You're needing to look at how do you support children with disabilities or young adults and design to meet their needs, preparing them for future education, post-secondary ed, employment, and independent living. So these are really key areas that were already in IDEA This exact same wording is part of PreEps and part of WIOA. So as you know, transition planning, it may start in different times in your school districts, but it's at least by 14 years old, and they're starting to look at what is possible for careers for me. And then looking at what are their own strengths, what are their interests, what opportunities can you teach, actual skills that that have those students be able to function and live in their community. So this is a question to think about. How is WIOA impacting your transition programs? And when I was presenting on WIOA over the last couple of years at conferences, some school district teachers never even heard of WIOA. Some were very well aware of it. But the thing is, it's so critically important that you know that this actually, WIOA does impact transition programs, and significantly if you're collaborating and partnering with vocational rehabilitation. So, and also looking at those other collaborations. Are you collaborating with the Job Center? Are you collaborating with the Independent Living Center? Because now WIOA requires people to be engaged across all of those in partnering. So are there transition goals, and what are the expectations? There's actual research that says when the teacher and the parents expect that that student should be employed and working, of course the outcome is they are. And I mean, of course that makes sense. But the idea is that you need to, it doesn't matter what level of disability students have. It makes no difference. They didn't say only for students that can read or write. They didn't say anything like that. They said all students with an IEP or 504 plan. And so the expectation is, how do we help build these transitional goals to live on their own, to have a job, and to participate in their communities? So that is the expectation of IDEA, and it's the expectation of WIOA. So there are 3 significant impacts from WIOA. I'm going to tell you each one. So one is the actual provision of PreEps. For students now in school, if they have an IEP or 504 plan, there should be some opportunity for them to receive PreEps of some sort. Now, when that starts for that student can be different based on your engagement with your state's VR programs. We'll talk more about that. And then absolutely, competitive integrated employment, community employment is the outcome for all students, and all students should be given the opportunity to try community employment. And then this strengthened collaboration. Some schools and VR agencies and adult service providers, very well connected, others not so. And it isn't even state by state, it might even be by school district and VR office specific. So WIOA says you must, as a VR counselor, connect to those schools. You must. So this is a really important understanding from the school perspective, is that voc rehab counselor is required to participate and be part of the school transition program. Now, what age, again, is a little dependent on your state agency's expectations. So let's start with one though, provision of pre-employment transition services. So WIOA says students, youth, with disabilities, and it means students, because PreEps is meant for, you have to be in school. It doesn't say what kind of school. It didn't say it can't be homeschooling, it couldn't be private school or public school. It doesn't say what type of schooling, but just that schools now are also then responsible to provide PreEps. So this, again, this collaboration with VR, what do schools provide, what will VR pay for? Now here is a huge change gaining thing. 15% of VR's entire budget must go to the provision of pre-employment transition services. Get it? This is huge, because in Wisconsin, prior to WIOA, VR was engaged with the schools, but they spent less than $1 million of their budget on students, because in some respects, the schools were expected to do more, and the VR would get in maybe at the very end when the student graduated. No longer. Now, Wisconsin is $9 to $10 million of their budget goes to PreEps, to students. That's a huge difference. So VR is not only motivated, they are mandated to now work with schools, work with the students, and find ways to make these connections to provide PreEts. And I'll tell you what the PreEts are. So again, this coordinated effort is expected under VR, and they actually have to send reports to the feds every quarter on how they are doing to spending this 15% of their money and engaging the schools and students in PreEts. So they even are required to look at how their IPE, which is called the Individualized Plan for Employment, matches up and links with the IEP. So the expectation now is that there's actual planning done together on transition towards employment. 15% is a new infusion of dollars. Now, I'm going to tell you something. It's not new money for VR. So this was a bit of their legitimate complaint, was that granted they are now focused on youth because early intervention has better results and more long-term results, but they weren't given any more additional money. So that meant that they had to use their existing dollars and pull 15% out to target for youth. So that has been some concern, because then adults with disabilities, there's been more waiting lists put together, or order of selection, it's called. So there's been a little bit of pull on that, but it is still the law. The second thing is, the law requires that when a student transitions out of school into a community job, they can't go directly. The school can no longer contract at all with a sheltered workshop. In the past, sometimes they would get work experiences. They would do work experiences with their students with more significant disabilities, and they'd have them do those work experiences in a workshop at sub-minimum wage. That is no longer allowable or legal. So now the schools cannot contract with a sheltered workshop to provide those services. They can contract with a sheltered workshop who provides community integrated employment services, and many of them do both. They have both services involved in their programs. So you can contract with them, but the idea is Voc Rehab can contract to look at providing employment services for youth. And so now that youth, when they leave school, VR must first try to work with that student. And I know you're automatically thinking about the students with the most significant disabilities. Well, some of them might not even go into a work setting. They may go into a day program. So they can still go directly into a day program, a day services program. But the expectation is now most of your students, can I say 95%, and even those students with the most significant disabilities, the idea is let's try community employment for them. And VR is committed to do that. Now, the only way a student can go directly into a sheltered workshop or community rehab program now is that they must have some job trials. How many? WIOA did not say. They did not mandate the number of trials, but they said that VR has to make an effort to really actually do that. And I have a Minnesota example there, and I meant to take that out because this was originally something I did with Minnesota, but there is a Wisconsin example. So here's VR. It says, only after a variety of trial temporary work opportunities over a sufficient period of time result in clear and convincing evidence that the student is not capable of benefiting from the Voc Rehab services, then can a decision be made to close the case due to the severity of the disability. And then they would be allowed to go into that rehab center. So I just want you to know, it's not just signing a piece of paper saying, yeah, the student's disability is too significant. Yeah, they can go. No, it's meant that VR needs to now make that concerted effort for even your students with the most significant disabilities. So the strength and collaboration, I'm hoping most of you are already experiencing this, I hope. And so I think one of the things that I wanted to express here is that this WIOA legislation mandates it. And so basically we're looking at what are some of the activities. So even people who are currently in the I'll call them the community rehab programs, sheltered workshops, even if they're in that, every 6 months or every year, they're actually getting counseling on moving into competitive integrated employment. So the whole idea is to get rid of the walls, have students out, have adults with disabilities out and working in their communities. So really connecting to the school earlier. Again, some VR agencies are doing some pre-ETS classes in the schools as early as 14. Some don't want to work with a student until 17 or 18. Some still don't want to work with a student until a year before they graduate. So I know it's varied based on your area. So definitely talk and find out what's going on there. So what are the pre-ETS? So here is the required activities. Here's the 5 activities. So one is job exploration. There's a little blog that explains each one as well. One is job and career exploration. The second one is work-based learning. The third is post-secondary education and training. The fourth is workplace readiness skills. And the fifth is self-advocacy. So I'm going to explain each one. So here are examples of what you'd want to do with students when you're trying to reach towards their looking at job and career exploration. So what are their vocational interests? There's vocational interest inventories. What is the current labor market? Again, your job centers might have that information. Your state workforce development agencies may have that. Well, what's the current labor market in your communities? I do understand right now is a little different. And in the moment, having students and trying to think about doing job placements for companies that may be closing, companies who've laid off people. This is, you know, obviously not right now, but even when we go back to having jobs, and I know many of the support employment agencies in my county, most of the people are not working unless they're in essential jobs. So, and then only maybe an agency, job coaches might only have a couple people working staff. So the labor market is going to change. I get that. So I need to talk as if it's going to go back, but at least some sense of normalcy. I've done job placement for people with significant disabilities since the 1980s and have gone through many recession times. And so I do know that there are still niches, there are still opportunities to place students and adults with disabilities in jobs. I've had that experience. And absolutely, there's still success in that. So that could be another whole training on that. Maybe I'll do that one. But I did do one, expanding employment opportunities for youth. So if you want that PowerPoint, I also have that as well as the PowerPoint for systematic instruction. I did those 2 webinars last week. If you are interested in seeing those 2 webinars, I actually have links to those as well. So you may need to let me know in your email or message that you want access to those. So what are the current labor market? What are some non-traditional jobs? Again, this is helping to really think about that student, what it is that they would like to do, sort of their interests, and then what are jobs that might match up with that? What are some hidden jobs in your communities? But where are your in-demand industries? And in most states, we're finding in-demand industries being in the healthcare field, information technology, manufacturing, farm and agriculture, construction. So if you have students that could fit regular job descriptions, great. If you don't, and you need to have customized employment and finding niches for students, but knowing what those in-demand careers are is really important. You can get that information, and there's access to this in your absolutely in your state's workforce development areas. And then having a self-assessment about that student. What are some career pathways of interest? We put these types of assessments, we have an assessment manual at Attainment Company, and we actually tried to build some of these assessments in our pre-ETS curriculum as well. So kind of having the student be able to look at that. And then what are some high school courses that actually would be relevant to careers? Are you having career fairs in your school? And if you aren't, how can you help organize those? And making sure students with disabilities are part of those career fairs. Bringing in guest speakers so that your students can get a chance to learn about jobs. And then this is really important, is having your students participate in whatever student organizations are going on. They call them CTSO, Career and Technical Student Organizations, and that's really part of this pre-ETS, is really matching that up for students getting those experiences. And then just understanding what skills and qualifications are required and getting some career counseling. So all of this PreEps and PreEps 1, some adult service providers are getting contracts with vocational rehabilitation to provide some of these PreEps. Some schools are actually doing these PreEps themselves. So these are just examples of what would be in the career and job exploration. The next one is work-based learning. So this would be actually the end of your of the teaching process, because I see each of these as sort of a process of getting towards this last one, which would be work-based learning experiences. You want students to get those, understand what are work relevant skills, how do they use a checklist in a job, how do they become independent in their job, can you get tours of businesses, can you simulate work experiences within the classroom or in the school building, are there mentorships you can develop? And then also looking at what assessments might be out there for students to know what their skill levels are or interests are. And then is there any training you can be working on, or can the student get some training? And it might just be training, and these are some examples: apprenticeships, internships, paid work experiences. The students have at least 2 or more paid work experiences while in school. They are 5 times more likely to be working out of school. And you know this as well. Those of you who heard my webinars last week know that when you think about the jobs that you had in high school, what did you learn? What were the skills you learned? That is so important that your students get work experiences as well, because that's the critical time where you start thinking about what it is you'd like to do for a job. What is it that you don't want to do for a job? What are skills? How do you have to smell? Do you have to be on time? How do you listen to an employer? So all of those are so important. And then job shadowing, spending a day with somebody, or an hour or a couple hours, finding people that will let your students go in and see what is it actually what does it take to be a construction worker? What is that like? And then those career mentorships. We'll talk about mentorships a little bit more in number 5. Can you do informational interviews? Are there student-led enterprises? Are there things the students can do that they can, especially online businesses? And then service learning, and that's about volunteering opportunities. So this work-based learning is really about students getting the opportunity to know how to translate their education and training and knowledge out of the school and into the community, into jobs and working with businesses and employers. The third one is called counseling on post-secondary education. So this is really looking at the post-secondary education opportunities and training. Some of your students are going to go on to school. Some might go to 8-week classes, semester classes, 1-year programs, 4-year programs. So it's a variety of opportunities. And the idea here is helping students really understand those career pathways. This is so important because we've had students that you know, they're deciding they want to go on to a 4-year or 2-year college, and they're still not really sure what they want to do. And so really helping those students understand what careers are, but what education is required for those careers, and what are some of those initial work experiences, apprenticeships that you can do to have those students get those experiences while in school. And Voc Rehab is willing partners to help provide support for this, at least they should be, and on providing on-the-job training. So doing some transition planning, looking at learning styles. How are the students, what are their learning styles? And having that assessment to help them know how they're going to translate being able to be successful in an educational setting in either a 1 to 4-year program. We talked about executive learning functions in this whole, in this area of post-secondary education, talking about preferences, options, and making sure that that student's applying for Voc Rehab services, and then, or if they're eligible for community long-term care supports, and actually being able to apply for Medicaid services, which provides them those long-term services. What accommodations might they need? Are they going to need a tutor? Are they going to need note-taking? What accommodations do they need? The books read to them, scripts? What is it that they're going to need to be successful in looking at that career pathway? Attending college fairs, having a summary of performance so the student really understands where they're at when they're done with school. And here's really important for those students that have more physical disabilities or communication challenges. What assistive technology are they going to need? What have you tried while they're in school to really support assistive technology and communication devices for those students? And what are their community options? What's options in their community? And military options. Some students are really interested in the military, but the military does not make any accommodations for taking the test. Apparently you can do some practice tests, but that student has to be able to pass the exams that are given right at those military opportunities. But they still might be an option for some of your students. The fourth pre-EPS is workplace readiness. Now, this is new to Voc Rehab. They only looked at direct job placement and maybe doing some on-the-job trainings, doing educational support. But this is that readiness training prior to going out. These are those soft skills. And quite honestly, this is why many people lose their jobs, is the soft skills. And I think about the many people I placed in jobs over the years. And typically, the majority are going to be soft skills were the problem. Whether they were communicating to people, talking too much at the work site, their hygiene just wasn't up to par, they weren't showing up on time, their attitude wasn't positive. There's a lot of reasons why people lose their jobs, and especially young people, because they're just learning these skills. So any expectation you can have in the classroom that mirrors the expectation of employers is so vital. And if you're part of an adult service provider system, whatever you can do in that setting that adult is in, that has the exact same expectations of employment, really is a value to that person. So here is that employability. These are soft skills that are so important to be successful. Here are the independent living skills that are so important. And thinking about what can you do in teaching these skills, both in the classroom and with the adult service system. So looking at all of this, this is really, independent living skills are often in places that you can go to the Independent Living Center to learn about as well. So see what's offered in your local independent living center on these skills. But also a lot of your community colleges will have some of these, like nutrition and meal prep. Using a cell phone, please make sure that there really is an understanding of what that means in a work setting, and but also the safety behind social media. Our students really need to understand that they can be pulled in very easily and be victims of some difficult and poor and bad social media situations. So really understanding the safety skills of that as well. And then appropriate dress, and how do you act appropriately in a job and out in the community. And then how do you access your community? So here is skills that really are important and are under this pre-EPS number 4. And that's like job seeking skills. What's your civic responsibility about voting, paying taxes? Home and community safety. What are safety skills? When do you get in someone's car? When do you not? What does it mean to safety in crossing streets? Walking out in your community, those interpersonal skills. And that's often something that our students have struggled with because they're not catching on to sort of that social norms that sometimes we do nonverbal communication when someone's too close to us, or they're too loud, or they're saying something really inappropriate. So really helping those students understand those skills, because that is going to be critically important in a work setting. Even understanding their reproductive health, their sexuality. And trust me, it's still a topic of conversation, whether you have a disability or not. So ignoring it or not addressing this and having conversations about this is a disservice. Now, what your school is able to do, and you as a teacher, I don't know. But to have these conversations, and if they have health classes, making sure your students are understanding what's being taught. Mobility, kind of orientation. How do you use a bus? How do you use a taxi? How do you use your Uber and Lyfts? How do you ask people for rides? How do you pay people to help be in a carpool? Understanding those transportation options. How do you ride a bike to work? And then financial literacy. This is critically important because you'll have students with lofty goals. I'm going to get my apartment. I'm going to be a football star, just all lofty goals. And that's fine. People can have great lofty goals. Good for them. But now we got to get down to reality. To be a football star, here's what you have to do. To be a taxi driver, here's what you have to do. And can you meet those skills and abilities and expectations? Well, okay, but what else then maybe you do? And then financial literacy is, I want an apartment. How do you save up for that first month's rent? A lot of landlords are asking for 2 months rent now, the first and the last. So how do you build up enough income for that in order to be able to move out? And what does it mean to pay bills? What is your paycheck when you see your paycheck and everything? The taxes are taken out, and healthcare is taken out. What does all that mean? So really having a good understanding of financial literacy. I don't know if any of you know Skills to Pay the Bills, but that's a really great resource. If it's free, it's called Skills to Pay the Bills. It's a free resource, and it's the federal government did it. It's a curriculum. You can download it. You can also get a copy of it. I highly recommend it. It's got some great skills for students, and it's free, and so make use of it. And then knowing your Social Security benefits. Really, again, families often say, my son or daughter can't work. They can't lose their benefits. Well, it's important that you understand you can work, and if you need to maintain your benefits, you can. You will be limited in the number of hours and wages each month if you need to keep your Medicaid for your services or your health care, which is legitimate. But many students can work off those SSI. If they're on SSI and SSDI, they will always be in poverty. Always, always. So how do you build a support system to understand what your Social Security benefits are? See if you can find a benefits work counselor and get a counseling session for your student on their benefits. So, and then number 5 is self-advocacy. So this is really important to understand, again, a new area for voc rehab. So in Wisconsin, they've been contracting with the independent living centers who are very well versed in self-advocacy skills. That's kind of their expertise, and really helping to build an understanding of student self-advocacy. Ooh, they said ABLE accounts are wonderful. And many states, even if your state doesn't have an ABLE account, learn about what that is. You can access other states' ABLE accounts. Wisconsin, we don't have our own, but we have access to be able to set those up. And that allows for parents or family members or somebody, anybody that cares about that student, to set up an account, and they can put up to, was $12,000, $15,000 a year. I haven't looked at that lately, and then that money has to be spent on that student, and if that student dies or that adult with disability dies, the money is gone. It's not like it goes anywhere, but yes, it's a great opportunity. What was the site called? Just type in your Google Skills to Pay the Bills, and you'll go directly to that federal website. So you'll be able to get that free curriculum, Skills to Pay the Bills. And just Google search it, and you'll get right into that. Department of Ed, I think, is the ones who put it together. I'm sorry, I should have put that on my resource list. I'll add that at the end of my session here. So really helping a student understand what their disability is. What happens so often is a student will say, they're sitting in these IEP meetings, they're hearing all of these blah, 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 and then they're thinking, like, well, you say, what is your disability? I don't know. And there's interesting students who go to UW-Whitewater. I've talked to the counselors there. They are going to a university and they go, what is your disability? Well, I guess it's there's not a clear understanding, because we try to always avoid that conversation, I guess. And then we say, what accommodations do you need? Well, I'm not sure. Making sure these students are clear about what it is that they need and what is their challenges and what are their gifts. It can't all be negative. We want positive self-talk. I think that's on this list, is really doing positive self-talk and really having that student be able to say, yes, I'm really good at this, but this is where I need help on. So when do you disclose to the employer you have a disability? Not every student needs to. And so there is a conversation about what you want to disclose and when. And then just really knowing what your rights and responsibilities, that self-advocacy, really having that self-determination, being able to understand who they are and sort of knowing where they're going and what accommodations they might need, and being a self-advocate. It's so important, because you always think, well, family will always be there, but they're not. And so it's really critically important for that student to have that on their own. So here are some key components to really looking at what you need in order to move that student from transition into competitive integrated employment. And I'm just going to briefly talk about these, and each one of these topics can have their own webinar. And I did do 2 of those webinars last week. So if you have an interest in seeing those, let me know and we can do that. Okay, so skills to pay the bills. And I'm going to actually put that on the website. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Somebody put it on there. Thank you so much. There's the website. Here is this discovery process. So really it's discovering what that student, having an assessment, looking at what a supported employment assessment might be. I can give you a copy of that. I'll include that in when I send the PowerPoints. And then really having an opportunity to have that student really think about their interests. So if they really think they want to be a taxi driver, what is it about a taxi driver? Well, they like talking to people, they like driving a car. Well, can you get a driver's license? Well, maybe that student can. Well, then here's what you have to do. Here's the next step. Well, are you going to be an Uber driver? Are you going to be a Lyft driver? Or are you going to be a taxi driver? So thinking about all the options and understanding the expectations and the responsibilities. So really thinking about matching that student's interests with what it is they want to do and what are some jobs that actually could match up to that. And maybe it might be jobs similar. So if a student says they want to be a construction worker, well, maybe they don't have the physical ability to be a construction worker, but maybe there are other parts of that job that they could do. So thinking about how do you bring about matching? We call it job matching, and it's the better the matching you can do for a student, but students are discovering things. So in some ways, those work experiences should be about discovering what it is they would be interested in doing. And then engaging employers, making sure you're having opportunities to talk to employers and really getting those networking skills and understanding talking that business talk. And I in my first webinar, I talked a lot about this, that you have value added to the employer. You have an untapped labor pool. You have students as a school district or as an adult service provider. You have people that want to work, are interested in working, or students just getting opportunities for experiences. There are tax credits. Work opportunity tax credit is still available for employers who do hire people with disabilities. And then training and actually doing the training. Often the paraprofessionals or teachers are doing some of the job coaching and training. I'm thinking about how you're doing that, breaking it down. My webinar last Friday was on task analysis and thinking about, how you break the job into parts that student can learn and be more independent. And then where are they going to need some supports? Maybe there's some adaptations you need. Maybe they need visual checklists. Maybe they need a video to show them how to complete that task. So using tools to really help that student be as independent as possible in those jobs. And then never forget the importance of soft skills. So really working with those students on soft skills and teaching them as part of PreEmployment is so important. And then that ongoing support, really communicating with that employer, talking to those coworkers, finding out how that student is doing in their work experience. You might need some retraining, you might need to go back. Are things going downhill? Maybe the students deciding they want to spend more time on their cell phone. So really going back in and doing some more training and understanding, if you do this, this is the consequence and you may lose your job. Then really developing that meaningful day idea so that a person, if they're going to maintain their benefits, they may not be able to work full time. So what are some things they could do during their day to bring meaning to them? It might be volunteering, it might be health and safety, might be going to wellness clinics or health clubs, or really looking at getting maybe additional education, but making use of that time that's meaningful. So school transition best practices really are looking at early career exploration. What jobs, what are in-demand jobs, what is the trends in your community? Looking at some assessment tools and finding tools that might work to look at doing interest inventories and then what accommodations might be needed if they're going to go into additional post-secondary education. Having the student engaged in the transition planning and the family, so the family can be a part of the conversation to really talk about, yes, employment is going to be an important aspect of the student's life in school and after school. Really important. And then really introducing families and students with voc rehab, making sure voc rehab is involved. In many cases, the voc rehab is, in many states, it's all different in pre-ETs. Some states are doing hiring half of the teacher's time is paid by the school, half of the teacher's time is paid by voc rehab, and they're teaching pre-ETs classes. Now, others are the voc rehab is contract with an adult service provider who comes in maybe at the end of the school day, during the school day, maybe just on weekends, maybe they're doing summer camps and providing pre-ETs, providing pre-employment transition services. And then giving those students opportunities, so important for job shadowing, bringing in speakers, doing tours of businesses, and then getting those direct work experiences are critically important. So it's important with VR as well. Ooh, Ability One companies, yes. So checking out if there's any Ability One companies in your area, and if I can find, I will look for that list as well. Because every state has Ability One companies that hire specifically people with disabilities. So thank you very much for that. I'll take a note on that one. Ability One and then Skills to Pay the Bills. I'll add those two. Okay. So VR needs to make sure that they're meeting their students. They should be at least 2 years prior to graduation. Some VR agencies are able to go younger, and that's great. The idea is rapid engagement, getting involved, getting those students some work experiences, or doing job placement once they're going to be out of school. Many VR counselors are, now the schools are assigned a specific VR counselor so that counselor is in charge of pre-ETs. And there might be multiple schools that they work with, or one school if you're a large school. They have an actual pre-ETs coordinator. It should be in your state or maybe just in your office, local office. So really having VR come to the schools, working closely with the schools is what the expectation is. Again, might be a little different in your community. Coordinating, because we really want families to have it convenient for them. Coordinating IEP, post-secondary plans, plan for employment, really connecting all of these plans that we have for students, getting summer work experiences. VR is doing a lot of summer work camps, getting students the opportunity to get work experiences during the time they're not in school, and then also providing support for students either during school hours, weekends, or after school hours. So here are some pre-ETs resources. These are some examples of students on the job, students with all different disabilities. Some with more significant disabilities, so I wanted to give you that. There's a guide Department of Labor's put together for youth, creating a path to employment. There is a free resource as well. It's called Explore Work, and it really helps students explore possible services and looking at careers for them, and not services, careers. And then there's the Skills to Pay the Bills. I have it on here. Ah, there you go. There is it. All right. Other programs you may be familiar with is Project Search is doing a lot of work with students at the last year of school. They are set up in many schools and businesses around the country, and if there is that available to your students, it's great. The Promise Grant was done with 14 and 15-year-olds who received SSI, Supplemental Security Income, and they developed a lot of tools for really promoting employment for that. And it was interesting that all they needed was 25% of their students that participated in this grant to be successful and get off benefits to pay for this whole grant. So Wisconsin was one of the states that was participating in that. Wisconsin also got one of the partnership grants for Let's Get to Work. And I just think this Let's Get to Work, WI.org, is a fantastic website filled with a lot of resources. WINTAC is their Technical Assistance Center, WIOA's official federal technical assistance center. They have a vast amount of information on their website, wintac.org. And then here's some more WIA resources. Here's a great video that shows Ben, who is working in a hospital and transitioning, and how important. I love this video, and why I shared it in my other webinars is he talks, but his family talks, his coworkers talk, his supervisor talks, and he talks about the importance of employment and getting that work experience, and now he's employed at Waukesha Memorial Hospital. There's some more students on the job, and there's my email. So Janet at attainmentcompany.com. I see a lot of you have given me your email, but you may email me as well if you want anything specific. I'm going to send you a certificate of completion so that it shows you were part of this webinar. I'm going to send you the actual PowerPoint, but if you want more access to past PowerPoints or past webinars, I'm more than happy to send those to you as well. So you can email me at janet@attainmentcompany.com for any of the resources. So thank you so much. I'm very happy that you were part of this webinar, and I hope that this was an opportunity for you to gain some insight to this. So thank you for participating, and I appreciate all your kind words. Thank you.